I'm Diego Chicano. I'm the co-curator of this exhibition that's titled Art of Dispersion, León Ferrari and Hudinilson Jr. I co-curated this exhibition with Dr. Sarah de Mello, who's also of Escala, the Essex collection of art from Latin America. And this exhibition was only made possible thanks to the generous donations of the estates of León Ferrari and Hudinilson Jr., as well as the mediation of Dr. Lisa Blackmore, who helped us get these artworks by Hudinilson Jr. So in the 1960s, the Xerox photocopier machine was introduced to Brazil as part of a neoliberal military dictatorship's attempt to modernize the country. By the early 1970s, these machines became the norm across office spaces in São Paulo, and they became a sort of symbol for the Brazilian dictatorship, and particularly the dictatorship's bureaucracy. By the late 1970s, artists in São Paulo specifically started to use the Xerox machine as a form of experimentation to make artworks. They started experimenting with the surface of it, photocopying different images, and also reproducing limitlessly a lot of artworks that they had already created. They came together to form the Xerografia movement, or the Xerography movement. For this exhibition, we decided to focus on two of the most important artists of the Brazilian Xerography movement, León Ferrari and Hudinilson Jr. We wanted to examine how these artists appropriated commercial printing techniques that were seen as a symbol of the Brazilian military dictatorship, and used these printing techniques to create and disseminate messages that would at once subvert the art market, but that also were sort of politically radical and politically emancipating. Photocopying allowed these artworks to become ephemeral and plural because they were able to reproduce these artworks limitlessly. Several galleries, most galleries, were not interested in displaying and trying to sell these artworks. Instead, the artists decided to go directly to the public. They would send their artworks, these reproductions, via post. They would hand them out directly to people. It allowed them to sort of cut out the middleman that was the gallery. And this also allowed them to circumvent and avoid government censorship. So this gave the artists a much more direct relationship to their audience, their viewers, and to other artists that they would share their artworks with. And they created these dispersive networks of communication. So the exhibition begins with artworks by León Ferrari. León Ferrari is a renowned Argentinian artist who worked particularly in the conceptualist movement. He fled Argentina in the 1970s and found exile in Brazil. He was fleeing a violent military dictatorship in Argentina. While he was in Brazil, he started experimenting with different printing techniques, and particularly took to the diazotype printing techniques, which you can see behind me here. Diazotype is a particular form of printing that architects use to create and reproduce blueprints. A product of his experimentation with diazotype was the Architectures of Madness series, which we have on display here in this exhibition. In this series, he creates blueprints that take inspiration from the giant metropolis that is São Paulo, but also the sort of deadening bureaucracy of the Brazilian dictatorship at the time. And he creates these narratives of distress and of madness and of frustration. You can see that in the artwork that's behind me, that's called Autopista del Sur, or Southern Motorway. In this artwork, you can see a spiral road that's jam-packed with cars that can't move. The artwork takes its name, its title, from a short story by the Argentine writer called Julio Cortázar. And in this story, Julio Cortázar talks about an absurd situation where there's a traffic jam that ends up going on for months. So similarly, in Bairro, which is one of the larger plans within the Architecture of Madness series, the artist employs ready-made printing stamps that create this like a labyrinthine network of streets and blocks of a city, basically, of a neighborhood. There's even a roundabout that's complete with a meeting taking place at its center. The faceless and sort of anonymous bodies that you see in this huge monumental print stand in stark contrast to Hudinilson Jr.'s very intimate and personal depictions of his own body, which we'll move on to in the next part of the tour. During his exile in Brazil, León Ferrari became quite an important and integral part of the São Paulo art scene specifically. So he became friends with a lot of artists and began experimenting and collaborating with them. In these collaborations, he became a big part of the Xerografia movement. He started to organize and curate exhibitions across São Paulo in several galleries and other institutions across the city. And one of the artists that he would often show and would collaborate very closely with was Hudinilson Jr. At the time, Hudinilson Jr. was a young queer Brazilian artist that was experimenting very intimately with the photocopier. Hudinilson Jr. is primarily known for his photocopy work, which we can see behind us here, but he also worked with performance, he worked in installation, and he had a lot of a very strong sort of public art practice as well. Fixation with one's own image is a recurring theme in a lot of Hudinilson Jr.'s work, and the work that you can see behind me here is undoubtedly a reference to Narcissus, the Greek mythological figure who fell in love with his own reflection. The artist's work largely consists of photocopied images of his own body, and consequently, his work has been interpreted primarily as acts of autoeroticism and an exploration of vanity. But a focus on the medium and the context within which this artwork was made provides a much more nuanced reading. So the military regime at the time really tried to promote this image of citizens as heteronormative, of being obedient, of being upright. Hudinilson Jr. appropriates this symbol of the state's bureaucracy, the photocopier, to multiply and reproduce his body. So he's reproducing what allegedly could not be reproduced, the queer body. And this dispersive strategy of multiplication, therefore, can be read not just as an exercise of vanity, but also as a queer act of subversion. This untitled collage behind me that Hudinilson Jr. began to work on in 1980 and only finished in 2009 is another example of how focusing on the medium and the materials with which Hudinilson made the artworks provides a much more nuanced reading and a much more politically valent, politically potent reading of Hudinilson's work. So throughout the military regime, a lot of young artists were forced to work with material and subject matter that reflected Brazil's lived reality and particularly their limited resources at the time. So many artists began working with magazines and newspapers and other forms of media that were considered to be tools of the state, tools for propaganda, for promoting nationalism. They appropriated the media's imagery to comment on matters such as nationalism, gender roles, and the repression of homosexuality. This collage particularly features classical depictions of men's body, alongside other pornographic images of men. The collage serves at once as this unapologetic expression of sexual desires that deviate from societal norms, or at least the norms at that time. Its more violent imagery, which features much more prominently on the back side of it, are an allusion to the dangers that these desires present within an authoritarian society. So Art of Dispersion, this exhibition, is the first exhibition to focus exclusively on the works of León Ferrari and Hudinilson Jr., despite the fact that they collaborated frequently and were very close friends. This may be because, at first glance, these artists seem very different to one another. León Ferrari's work is quite large, it's quite impersonal, while Hudinilson Jr.'s work is much smaller, more intimate, and depicts his own body. A closer examination, a closer look at the medium and the context within which these artworks were made reveal their similarities. Both artists appropriated state tools to critique and comment on their lived experiences within these dictatorships from their own particular perspectives.